express what's happening inside of here to make that accessible to somebody else so they can help and understand, and I can understand how they're doing that on the inside, so we can more effectively work together, be together, grow together, and everything else that we have to do because we're in it together.
Greetings and welcome to the latest episode of the Elevate podcast. I'm delighted to be live in person today with Christopher Gladwell, who some of my audience may be aware of, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Just this week, we've had Christopher within our Elevate Network private community running an introduction to breathwork. He gave a brief overview of the kind of theory and philosophy of breathwork, and then we had a beautiful guided session. And we've done many live different experiences and practices across the last few months within the Elevate Network. And Christopher's session so far has had the most gratitude and recognition for the impact it had in real time. So my team and I said, wouldn't it be great to get Christopher on the show so we can learn more about his work, learn more about his journey into the practices, and give other people the opportunity to experience what each one of us experienced on Wednesday night. You may also recognize Christopher from our epic event that we ran at the beginning of the first lockdown, where we during Elevate Live we ran an online program that lasted for something like 45 days. Christopher then also joined us for a guided breathwork session. But if you're new to Christopher's work, you're in for a treat. I'm really looking forward to unpacking the experiences that we've had in the last week. I'll share a little bit about my experience today. I've literally fresh come from here in Bristol, a class with Christopher in Bristol. I'll share around some of the nerves I had about visiting that for the first time. So if you've never done any breath work or yoga, you're in safe hands, because that is also true for myself. If you're an experienced practitioner, there's a lot for you to learn here as well. Now, Christopher's been studying and practicing yoga in its many forms through physical practice, conscious breath work, mindfulness meditation for over 35 years. He's a trained biologist. He studied Western psychology, psychotherapy, NLP, clinical hypnosis, and explored martial arts, dance, mindful movement, and other bodywork. So he's quite the master. His work encompasses 4 key areas: conscious breath work, embodied awareness, mind mastery, and relational intelligence. 4 things that I truly believe are critical in our move forward from what we've just been through over the last 2 years of the pandemic, and we'll touch upon that as well. So it's a pleasure to have you with me, Christopher.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Dan.
Now, I want to just share my personal experience of what I went through this morning. So it reminded me of my first entrance into meditation. And I came from the corporate world originally. My life has changed infinitely since those days. But I was out in Florida, and 2 of my friends said, "Your mind is so busy. Do you ever relax?" And they taught me this simple meditation practice. And I was resisting and resisting and resisting. But I just followed their lead and just had this beautiful, and I could tell a much longer story. We haven't got time for today, but this beautiful 45-minute deep presence that I'd never felt in my life before. But I was nervous. I was unsure what to expect. And I had all of those feelings again this morning going to the mindfulness, the breathwork class, because I wasn't sure whether we'd be doing yoga, physical work, breath work. And I may be relatively flexible in mind. That's what I said to Christopher this morning, but flexible in body, I am not yet. And I was curious about whether I'd be the only person in the class who can't move their body in certain ways. I was worried about, am I wearing the right things? So all of this mental chatter was going on in my mind before we arrived at the class today. But Chris very quickly put me at ease. And through the kind of personal attention that I had a really deep, profound experience through some foundational and fundamental breathwork techniques and some movement practices later on that really gave me a gentle introduction into some really core tenets that I'm really excited about embodying. So I wanted to share that with you, because if you've not yet entered into the world of, say, breathwork or yoga or mindfulness, I want to let you know that's okay. But I feel like, and I'm interested to unpack this now with Chris, is the world is perhaps yearning for some of these practices, given what we've just gone through for the last couple of years. So I'm curious to learn more about your own journey, whether you had similar nerves going into your first experience when you first began. But before we go into your backstory, I'd love to just sense into and feel into what is your take about where the world is right now, and why some of these things that we've just alluded to are so important?
It's complicated times, and basically it's very complicated. I think we've coming, we know what's going on globally at the moment in terms of the imminent threat of nuclear war, which is as an existential threat is hanging over all of us. And the idea of some Sarmat missile that could destroy 15 cities at once is absolutely, the fact that we as a species have allowed ourselves to get to this point, where we can just extinguish millions of life like that is just ridiculous as far as I'm concerned. It's pathetic, actually. And the fact that we haven't had the ethical base and the functional base to look at how we manage ourselves, systemically, globally, in a way that actually makes life workable here for us as human beings, either in terms of that or in terms of climate, ecologically. We're kind of way behind on our trajectory of ethics and applied practices, applied science, applied everything to actually make this planet continuously inhabitable for the human species and all species. So we're well off track as far as I'm concerned in that domain. And we've got a lot of catching up to do. And for me, these practices are part of that journey. As you said, you alluded to, one of my backgrounds is a biologist. And but biology and all science, by the way, has exploded in the last 30 years. And unless you've got a deep embedded understanding of what that actually means, you kind of don't know, really. I mean, if you haven't heard of a Hox gene, for example, or epigenetics and all the other things that are going on in the world of science, say biology, for example, it's difficult to understand. Have you heard of neuroplasticity? And we kind of need to understand these things because this is how this system actually works. And this system is set up, like I said in class this morning, for certain things. It's set up basically for survival and reproduction. And there are patterns that we have to work with to enable the optimal function of us individually and therefore us collectively. And these practices enable and access that level of optimal function so we can actually really look after ourselves and look after our planet. And that's the way I'm seeing it, in that kind of way, right?
Yes.
I mean, I'll stop there for a minute. I'll let you ask some questions because I can talk for England, so I've got to.
Yes. Well, I think one of the things that I've drawn out from this is, and this is a lesson I've learned many times in my life, that the idea that our inner world is our outer world is a reflection of our inner world. And right now we're witnessing great conflict, and it's not limited to Russia and Ukraine. We've seen great tribalism and polarization of people over the last couple of years. In fact, it's not just in the last couple of years, Brexit, this whole, people are just fighting with each other. You log into, say, a social media platform and it's just verbal abuse. To me, I wonder, whether the external conflicts that we're seeing are somewhat a reflection of a disconnect between our true selves and a level of inner peace. And perhaps there's a yearning that we find that within self-love, inner peace, tranquility, and almost dealing with our own inner conflicts.
Yeah, I think, like I said, my background is science as well. So I've got 40 years now of traditional practices of meditation, deep yoga, this kind of breath work, this kind of thing. So I've got this kind of coming together of the science and tradition in that way. And so I'm going to talk about a rat brain for a minute, okay?
Yes,
just a distraction. So if you look at a brain of a rat, rats, a third of their brain is the olfactory bulb, and that means the bit that does smell. So if you imagine the bit behind your nose, and then a full third of your brain is connected to how you smell things. So it's an olfactory world. Yeah, it's all about smell. And in fact, a rat can't separate a smell from an emotion. A smell is an emotion for a rat.
Wow.
All right. So you can imagine the rat is moved around. If you know what an emotion is like, it moves you. It makes you do things.
Yes.
Anger makes you do things. Love makes you do things. These emotions make us move because as mammals, that's what they're supposed to do. They move us into and out of relational contexts.
Yes.
So if we don't understand them, I could put you onto loads of resources here, by the way.
Yes.
But if you don't understand them, it's very complicated because we're sitting in this kind of soup of unconsciousness around it. Yeah. So, a part of the brain for a rat, that emotional brain is its smell. And then just behind that is a bit of the brain called the insula. And the insula is a bit that does disgust. Okay. Now, for a rat, of course, it saves a baby rat's life. The baby rat comes along, smells something, it's rotten, nasty, off it goes, and it's alive still. It doesn't die from eating that rotten thing.
Mm.
Okay. Now we've got the insula as well, but in mammals like us, it's been repurposed to a different thing. All right. And it connects to other bits of brain like the anterior cingulate cortex. And what happens, and various other bits as well, but kept the brief, and parts of the prefrontal cortex. And what that does then is it links disgust to how we look at other people.
Right.
All right. So if you look at the situation where people on social media, for example, are talking about others, yeah, because what we're talking about here is selfing and othering, us and them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And us and them happens at a biological level. It happens in your adrenal glands. It happens in your brain. It's not just something we think. It's not just up here. It's the whole body does us and them. So, you know, and if you look at the, you know, any propaganda from the Nazi era or anywhere, it's all about those disgusting others who do that. They do that. They're the ones that do that. They're responsible. Yeah. And all that is taking that other human being and turning them into an other object.
Yes.
It's dehumanizing and objectifying. And any movement, whether it's slavery, or whether it's the war in Ukraine, anything that's happening, people are being othered and objectified.
Yes.
And that's a function of those old bits of the brain. And if we don't have the capacity to access that experience inside of us and choose not to follow that route, because it's a choice moment and it's a choice point. Yeah. So awareness comes into play. And we build awareness by building neural bridges between the middle bit of the prefrontal cortex and the bits on the side, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And, you know, there's a great scientist called Richie Davidson I was talking about earlier today. And so, you know, the evidence on meditation is that we can actually change the way the brain functions through these practices.
Powerful.
It is powerful. You know, it's time we got to understand this and started exploring this stuff in educational settings. You know, one of the things I'm really passionate about is getting these tools, not just mindfulness the way it's been translated in the Western world, but a deeper understanding of what mindfulness is, because originally it was called sati, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah. So looking at these practices and how we can make them functional in the world, because this is part of, as far as I'm concerned, how we take hold of our own evolution. You know, I don't know if you know much about evolution. It's a fantastic topic, and again, I can point you into it's some great work these days, like Neil Shubin's work. If you don't know Neil Shubin, look at Neil Shubin, Your Inner Fish. Or I can't remember the name, but Alice, who wrote The Incredible Unlikeliness of Being, a brilliant book.
Wow. Some
great stuff, very contemporary books, right? But, you know, things evolve in dynamic relationship with the environment. And that includes the social environment. So the social environment we create and the ecological environment we create, i.e. if we fill it with plastics, if we fill it with toxicity, that's the environment we are involving in. Yeah, that affects all our evolution. And all our evolution affects how we think and feel. It affects everything that we are. And everything our future generations are. It really matters. It really, really matters. So we have to get on top of this so we can be conscious and clear about the choices we are making. Do we continue to fill the oceans with plastic, fill the air with CO2, with SO2, with fumes? Do we continue to do this? What other choices are available to us, and why are we making those choices? And how do we know that they're the right choices? And if we don't have that level of consciousness in terms of what we're doing around our own biology and around the effects of how we operate in the world and how that then affects our future generations, we're kind of sunk. We've got to get on this.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it feels that we've jumped straight into the deep end.
Yeah, great. Like the deep end. Swim.
Well, let's take, before we navigate the deep, let's take a step back and connect the dots between, I suppose, my story of entering into that journey. And, you know, I feel like I've been on an inner journey world for about 15 years on an intellectual level, you know, reading so many books. I have practiced meditation, mindfulness in different ways, but I feel like I'm a humble student again and beginning the journey. And I'm really curious to embody these practices. This feels like an open new world to me. I'm just deeply curious and excited. But I'm interested about your initial entry into that. Where did your journey begin?
I grew up in the north of England. Yeah, I was born in the 1950s. So I grew up in the north of England, and it was interesting times for me. I was a weird kid. I was really into flowers and birds and animals, and unrepentantly so, in a world that demanded I play football and fight. And I mean, I like football. Football's cool, but I wasn't that interested in it. And I wasn't interested in doing the stuff I wanted. I wanted to do what I wanted to do. So I was, you know, and it was a culture at the time was a lot of corporal punishment at school. I got beaten at school. I got caned at school. I got slapped by my parents. all the kind of stuff that went down in the 1950s and because all that was okay. Yeah. So you end up with a very traumatized child.
Yeah.
So I think initially what I was doing was running away from trauma.
Yeah.
And literally I was. I mean, I joined the Territorial Army, the Parachute Regiment.
Wow.
And so I was into I got into battle marching, which was like running with full jacket, metal helmet, the whole thing. And I used to practice running. I got into running. And I would start running with bricks tied around my waist, and I'd go up the hills of the north of England, up in the Pennines, run up in the Three Peaks in North Yorkshire, Lancashire area. I did all sorts of crazy stuff like that. But I think I was running away at that point in time. But I didn't know what I was running away from. But something happened, because I was reading a lot of stuff at that time. I've always loved reading. I've always had a book in my bag. I still have.
Yes.
Got my bag over there. I've got a book in there, I promise you.
Yeah.
I've always carried a book. So I'm always studying and always a beginner in that way. But it's like, I got into sort of Native American teachings, and particularly reading about the Apache people and various the Cherokee and the Chippewa and the different tribes, and what I could find out about how those tribes lived, all sorts of stuff. And there's lots of stuff around breathing there. Yeah, because the mothers used to put a finger over the child's mouth when it was sleeping to stop it mouth breathing when it was asleep. So it would train its body to nose breathe. And the Apache natives, the young boys, they had to run across the desert with a mouthful of water and spit out the water at the end, nasal breathing all the way.
Wow.
So I was training myself to run up these mountains with bricks around my waist by breathing in through the nose, by going and running at the pace of the breath. So I started the breath work unconsciously. Because I didn't know anything about breath work, at that point in time.
Yeah.
And it's through that ongoing journey, death of my father, all sorts of things. There's lots of stuff that happened, which I initially trapped in my body, as we do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all that suffering, there's lots of other stuff, sexual abuse, all sorts of stuff. So all that stuff got trapped in my body, and I was kind of running around doing this stuff with all that sitting in there unconsciously. So I was trying to manage all that stuff. And, initially I'd say my life was a bit of a disaster. And, I tried all sorts of ways of numbing the complex emotions that I was kind of semi-aware of. And none of those strategies worked. I was aware enough to stop those strategies fairly successfully and fairly quickly, and had enough willpower and whatever grace or whatever you want to call it to be able to stop those. And I'd say, that yoga found me, really. So I got into martial arts after that. I was into martial arts for quite a long time, running in martial arts. I went through a range of different martial arts applications, to different modalities. And I ended up with a really big back injury, a bilateral prolapse disc. I couldn't walk. I was in such pain.
Wow.
And so I was just, I was stuck. I couldn't run. I couldn't practice martial arts. I started sleeping on the floor, and changed my life radically, changed my diet to just doing things that felt like they would make a difference. Went to see the doctors. That was relatively unhelpful. So I figured I had to do it myself, and started doing things with breath and doing things with movement that felt good. And I felt like it was making a difference. It felt like I was getting better. So 6 months later, I was a lot better, and I was walking and doing all sorts of stuff like that. It'd been a journey, and a friend of mine showed me a book, and in the book were all these shapes and these people doing this stuff, and it was called yoga. And I thought, that's what I've been doing. That's it. That's what I've been doing. Yeah. So I've got to find about this. Of course, in those days, there were no yoga studios. There wasn't any yoga. You couldn't find any.
Of course.
So I had to, anyway. But what happened was somebody gave me a telephone number, and with this number on, I called this lady, and she said, yes, come work with me, this kind of thing. And I went to see her, and she was my first teacher. So I worked with her for about 12 years.
Wow.
But she's still alive. Amazing woman. And I think that was the beginning of my sanity.
Wow.
And I remember another interesting, these pieces come together, you don't know what's happening at the time. She gave me a practice from a teacher called Abhinavagupta, I mentioned the other night.
Yes, you did, yeah.
So Kashmiri Shaivist teacher from about the 10th century. And that practice was paying attention to every single breath during the course of the day.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. So, of course, at that point, okay, yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, I'll do that. 20 years later, of course, every breath is conscious.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, every breath is aware, in awareness. And, of course, when the breath is aware, then a lot of everything else comes into awareness as well. So you get this bubbling up of awareness through the system. And particularly, of course, because emotions arise out of the body. And if you want to read more about emotions, read Lisa Feldman Barrett's amazing book called How Emotions Are Made, Constructionist Theory on Emotions. It's really good. But that's, the way you can, and, in deeper meditation as well, you're getting to a level of awareness of the sensations as kind of phenomenal bubbles in the system, and how that transforms, and how that's made into emotions in the limbic system in the brain, and how that relates to thinking, and how thinking and feeling and sensation are one continuous flow of connected stuff. There's not those separate pieces. But that takes time. There's a process, an organic process in that. Yeah. So that's a kind of a long answer to your question.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. Thank you.
Yeah.
What I'm now fascinated about, you were saying you were this takes me on to wanting to know the beginning of yoga, because there you were doing this movement, unconsciously doing yoga.
Yeah.
You didn't have a label for it, a reference point at that moment. You may have been aware of yoga, I don't know.
No,
but what about, is that how yoga? What's the origin story of yoga? Was that someone going through a similar experience in the fact that they were practicing these movements, and there was this my body is signaling that this is a positive? Is there any connect? Could you share a little bit about the origin of yoga? Does it relate to your story?
There's I've written a book called The Story of Yoga, which looks at the origin of yoga, which is mostly pictures, actually, which is really beneficial. It's a kind of mind map of the origins of yoga. But I think it's again, the origins of yoga is multifaceted. So there's, as far as I understand it, there's elements of yoga within shamanism, and there's elements of yoga within, you get the Brahmanical and the Shramanical tradition. So the Brahmanical tradition is the orthodox Vedic tradition of priests and the system. And you get the shamanic tradition of people going to live in the forests and doing practices that felt right and being sent there by the teachers to explore things. So you've got the shamanic, you've got the shramanic, you've got the brahmanic, right? You've got all those pieces, and then you've got, you've got different strands of yoga. So things like Raja Yoga, which is yoga of light. It's kind of meditative practice. You've got Hatha Yoga, which was started sometime around probably about the 4th, 5th, 6th century. Certainly went into Tibet and became Hatha Yoga. So it influenced Tibetan teachings, and it influenced a lot of work. So all the stuff you think of as in studios these days is highly influenced by that tantric Hatha Yoga. Hatha means the unification of the sun and the moon. So there's a whole lineage where you begin to get physical stuff in it, because the yoga previous to that was much more meditative, breath focused, meditative. So you look at the Upanishads and the Vedas, and they talk about breath. They're talking about breath and body parts and the importance of breath, and bringing mental energy down into the heart and this kind of thing. So I think, the origin of yoga is multifaceted, I would say. And you get different mythologies. So if you look at different traditions, whether you look at Vaishnavism or Shaivism, so Vaishnavism is the worship of Vishnu in the Vedic world, or Shaivism, Shiva. So if you look at those different traditions, they have different mythic stories, and each of those mythic stories is a metaphor. But ultimately, say for example, it all comes from Shiva. Is in the Shiva story.
Yes. And
Shiva, of course, is the god Shiva is a metaphor for formless consciousness. So it all bubbles out of formless consciousness.
Could you explain formless consciousness? The formless thing that you need to put words to.
No. No. There are different names for it in Sanskrit, like avyakta and things like this, but it's I think a good way to explain it would be to talk about quantum physics.
Okay.
Should we go to quantum physics?
Let's go there.
Quantum physics. I don't know. Do you know the Alan Aspects experiment in 1968?
I can't say I do.
I don't know. Okay, well, I did an experiment in Paris in 1968 where he was spinning particles together to see what would happen when they separated at a distance. And this is what Einstein was talking about spooky action at a distance. So when the particles are separated, when one of them changes its spin, the other one automatically, spontaneously, immediately changes its spin.
Wow.
All right. Now, what should happen is there should be a time lag between that, which is the speed of light.
Right.
Now, what was spooky about that was it happened immediately.
No way.
No time lag. Okay. So that was a conundrum at the time, and this was really the beginning of looking at WTF, what's going on?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
The big one. Like what? The speed of light is not the fastest thing in the universe. So what's happening here, right? So that experiment was replicated many, many times over, and they isolated gravity, and they put particles further and further and further apart, as far as Paris and New York even, and still the same thing happened. So there should be speed of light between those two changes. One changes, there should be speed of light. When you've entangled the particles, there should be, and there's not. So I don't think, I'm not a physicist, first of all, just be clear, I'm not a quantum physicist, all right? So I could be completely ignorant here. So check it out for yourself. But, David Bohm came up with a theory, which I think is interesting, and it's certainly becoming a little bit more popular again now. It went down to popularity for a while. And that is that the reason why is because there aren't two particles. All right. So when those things become entangled, right, what he described it as was the implicate and the explicate. Right. So the implicate is the infolded and the explicate is the outfolded. So what we see and what we experience as what Buddhists call appearances, or what they call rupa, or form in Sanskrit, is the solidity, the appearance of vibrating particles, yeah, that give this experience of edges.
Yes.
So the reason I can't put my hand through that wall, maybe with enough practice I can, but the reason I can't put my hand through that wall is because thally particles are spilling differentially to these ones. That's all. So
Yes.
it's a particle thing going on, right? It's a spinny thing.
Yes.
Energetic spinny thing. So you know, all right. So but ultimately everything is connected. I mean, like I did on the breathwork on the other day, you know, when you breathe in, and breathe in, please breathe in. When you breathe in, the reason your body is breathing is to breathe in oxygen. Yeah. And like I said, all those molecules of oxygen, every single one of them, bar a tiny, tiny amount, because way back 3.85 billion years ago, there was 0.04% oxygen on this planet. We're now running at around about 21% in the atmosphere. It's changed. So in Carboniferous times, when we had big dragonflies and big things, yeah, the reason why we could have big things is because of 35%. All right, right. But we're at 21% at the moment, and you know, 0.04 back then. So all the oxygen has been made by green things, all of it by photosynthesis. Yes. So the green miracle of a little bacterium, you know, evolving to use sunlight to split water, to split it into hydrogen and oxygen, and then bind that hydrogen in with carbon dioxide to make sugar, was just like, that is it, that's it.
Yes.
Yeah. And that oxygen goes off into the atmosphere to create an atmosphere. Otherwise, our atmosphere would have blown away, like I said, on Mars. It would have just blown off and been a dry planet. So courtesy of that one green miracle, you know, we have life on this planet. And it's about time we started being more respectful to plants. You know, we're just desecrating planets, forests. You know, we're just destroying everything. It's pathetic. You know, those... Oh, never mind. I'm just thinking of that chappie in Brazil, who, you know, Jair Bolsonaro, listen to me. Stop it now. Just saying. Yeah. You know, planets are crucial. Forests are crucial. You know, as are green algae. Everything is, all the green stuff. Anyway, so that miracle. All right. So when you're breathing in from those plants. You're breathing in that, and every living thing is doing that. But that oxygen goes to every single cell in your body. It doesn't suddenly change when it goes into your nose. It's not your breath. It's just air.
Yes.
It's just air that's going to every cell. So right in every single cell of your body, that's air going into that. There isn't this place where suddenly you begin and the air ends. Yeah. And all the movement, if you do that with your hand with me right now, do that with me, do anything. Yeah. All that movement you can do is courtesy of the sugar that is fueling energy production in your system. It's from glucose and fatty acids that we make energy in the mitochondria. We'll talk about mitochondria later, but we make energy out of that. And that energy makes every single movement, every single synapse, every single thought, every single emotion, everything you can possibly think of or do is fueled by that sugar. And that sugar comes from plants. Even if you eat animals en route, it originally comes from sunlight, splitting water, making sugars. Plants make that up, yeah? And then we eat it downstream, if you like, later on. But so we are plant powered. And understanding that level of connect to everything, without exception, is seamlessly interwoven. It's just to our nervous systems, it doesn't feel like that. And our culture has run with a mythology for, you know, a couple of thousand years that says that we're all separate and independent and self-made individuals. We're self-made individuals, and we should just go out there and do it by ourselves. Sorry about that, just playing there. It's all nonsense, of course. You know, everything is interdependent, and everything is interdependently arising. And that it's time for those kind of juvenile philosophies to be dissolved for what they are. They're idiocy. They're nonsense. At a scientific level, at every level, they're nonsense. So coming back to quantum physics, right?
Yes.
Implicate and explicate. This is form, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, then the implicate is kind of deep interwoven substrate of everything, where everything is connected. Right. Now, Buddhists call it shunyata, or emptiness, but they don't mean empty. Yeah. Now, I had the blessings to do a week's thing with the Dalai Lama one time, looking at what they call the Madhyamika, which is the a particular Buddhist philosophy, looking at the middle way and understanding, explaining what that means. So it was amazing to work with that guy. And emptiness isn't empty. It doesn't mean void. It means empty of anything, which means empty of emptiness.
Yes.
Right. So if you can understand what,
Yes.
we can talk about non-conceptuality. If you can understand what emptiness of emptiness is, then you're kind of getting there. All right.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. So and of course so many other systems. I know some religious systems hate Buddhism because it says empty, and they think it literally means empty. But they don't understand. They haven't bothered, because the closest way you can understand that is inconceivable. It's inconceivable. It's beyond any possible name, concept, or anything that you could throw at it. So formless consciousness is inconceivable.
Yes.
It's pristine awareness. It's something, nothing, everything. Yeah, and none of those.
Yes. Yes.
All right.
Yes.
But that's what Shiva means. So when yoga comes out of Shiva or is taught by Shiva, that's what it means essentially.
Okay.
So yes, so that was Shiva manifesting yoga through the form of this body in that action, in that moment.
I see.
All right. But it continually does that.
Indeed. Okay. So now there's a couple of things I want to unpack. This notion of formless consciousness and form, does this connect in any way to the idea of duality, non-duality in Buddhism? Could you explain a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, in both Buddhism and something like Kashmiri Shaivism, or the sort of more tantric aspects of yoga, as I understand it. And of course, there'll be people who disagree with me, and that's always good because then we can have conversations.
Imagine that, being able to have different opinions and not hate each other.
And it's good idea. But this is what
we should do more of that as well.
Yeah. So the relative level, the basic level of dualism is me and you, self and other. There we go. Yeah, self and other. And we can do a range of things in that selfing and othering. Yeah. And also it comes down to subject-object relationships, me and the chair, or me and whatever it is. Yeah. So there's me as the subject, and there's the objects, which can include other people. Right. So it depends on the subject-object dance we do, how we are as subject to the things that we create objects of our mind. And deep yoga is really looking at that subject-object relationship, clarifying that to find out what's real in here, what's true in here, what's just a story that my brain is making up. Yeah. And the answer is, well, all of it. All of it, actually. Yeah. Because, if you look at the evolution of this mammalian form, then it's to reproduce, and of course that means that we have to then survive and we have to eat things. So having that neural boundary and selfing and othering going on, that this is me, that's food at a basic level. Yeah. Well, that's me and that's a threat. That's me and that's an enemy. Those kind of things, they're inbuilt into our system. And I was talking about earlier on with bits of the brain like the insula and the anterior cingulate cortex, and how that relates to bits of the prefrontal cortex.
Yes.
Yeah. So we have got built into us a selfing, othering mechanism, default mode network, and so on. These various pieces of the brain that do, this is me and that is you. Yeah. And then depending on how that is grown up in the world, depending on the culture that lands in, it then behaves in various ways. Right. So we find all these mechanisms are complicated by things like childhood adversity. Childhood adversity is one of the biggest problems we've got on this planet, again, because it changes the way brains grow. It makes brains less optimally functional. It's a real problem. And if you look at something like dopamine or serotonin, various neurotransmitters, and how they operate in the brain, if you look at testosterone, everybody thinks testosterone is connected to aggression. Testosterone is not connected to aggression directly. Right? Testosterone in males is connected to status-seeking behavior.
Yes.
It helps you to, you want to be the alpha kind of thing.
Yeah.
But only in a culture which promotes aggression. Does that mean it's aggression?
Of course. Yes.
It might be something else. It might be extreme kindness. Yeah. If alpha is being incredibly kind, then you'll head towards doing that.
Yeah.
So the culture then directs those biological energies, those biological movements of neurotransmitters and bits of the brain, everything else, to behave in certain ways. Yeah. Depending on the culture it's embedded in.
Yes. So, wow. I mean,
you can't separate the individual forms. So anyway, you asked me self and other. So that's that's the relative level of self and other.
Yes, I understand.
Right. And then there's a deeper level, the integral level, which is understanding that the implicate is the explicate. and the explicate is the implicate. Or if you go to Buddhism, what it says is, the tattoo here, look, that one there, it says Dayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasam Gate Bodhisvaha, which in a nutshell means form is emptiness and emptiness is form. So the inconceivable is form and form is the inconceivable. Yeah. So this is it. This is it. What are we going to do about it? And when you recognize that this is it, and what are we going to do about it, you start to have choice. What
Yes.
are we going to do about it? What are we going to co-create? What are we going to make of this? What are we going to do here? What's available?
Yes. What's alive right now?
Yeah.
Fascinating. Well, on that point, you began your story by saying that you didn't know what you felt that you were running away from something, but you weren't sure what. You reached this point of practice that didn't yet have a label. It took you on a journey where I'm sure much of what you've just shared has come from that point on, where you began to understand and explore more. From that initial kind of unconscious journey of finding your way, what path did you then go on? You know, what did you become a seeker? Did you become deeply curious and wanting to understand? You know, what path did you follow that went from there?
I think the path is an interesting concept, isn't it? And seeking is an interesting concept. So I'm just going to play with those concepts
Please,
a minute. Yeah.
do.
I think, and if you're a seeker, you're looking for something that isn't here. Yeah. So it's about being a finder. And I think there comes a point in time when you realize, oh, I'm seeking, but what I'm seeking for, it's nowhere else but here. So there's a finding that has to happen.
Yes.
Yeah. So you have to change from being a seeker to a finder. I think that's a key piece. I'm not sure how that happens. I think it's a unique thing, but I think the path as well. The path is where you're putting your feet.
Yes.
It's an unfolding.
Yes.
It's not, and I think we can have plans like, I'm going to go and do a yoga teacher training course. I'm going to become a coach. I'm going to do this. And they're really good plans. They're great. But of course, what happens while we're doing that is what's really important, which is what's happening internally as we're doing that work. It's what's, it's the inner work of the unfolding that I think really matters, that really enables the change that we were looking for. And that we're looking for on that path is actually happening in here as we step on that thing that we thought we were walking on, which was right here and always was here and always will be here.
Well, yes, that takes me to this idea of remembrance. And there's a quote that I don't remember the quote, but it's the idea that you go up the mountain looking for something to find that it was already there. And the finding, is there a connection between finding and remembrance, and also thinking about the trauma experience that you shared? Is it, almost getting back to that kind of default open consciousness? Is that something to do with remembrance and the finding of the...
I think remembrance is key. I think remembrance is the key. I think, the trauma stuff, you end up with some scars, but they're just kind of like dressings at the end of the day. Don't feel like it when you're working with it, when you're in the middle of it or anything else like that. But if if you're graced enough to go deep into releasing the holding patterns and the complexities around trauma or complex trauma or whatever you're working with, and finding that softness and that vulnerability again, because trauma is very much about protection. The trauma response is about protecting. We go into a place of connection. If the trauma's happened in the body, we dissociate. We go into a strange place. And we've got to learn those patterns of protection that we've done, and to find a way of dropping those patterns of armoring. And that softening, if you like, is then a way of landing back in that original goodness. Remembrance, we're talking about mindfulness. I mean, mindfulness, the original word for mindfulness is sati, which in the Pali language means remembrance. And the Sanskrit word for sati, before it became sati, because the Sanskrit word is smriti, and smriti means remembrance. So all yoga is about remembrance, right? All mindfulness, really. It's not about being mindful, because again, within smriti, there is a concept of, I would say would have been better translated as heartful presence, compassionate presence, all right? But what's happened is it's got translated into Western speakers mindfulness. And you can feel the difference in that heartful presence. But heartful or compassionate presence wouldn't go into the corporate world anywhere near as well. You know, who in the corporate world is going to say, "Oh, let's have some compassionate presence in our industrial way. Let's have some mindfulness." You know, it's a different thing. But it comes from that. So, you know, sati or mindfulness is a practice amongst a whole culture of practice.
Yes.
Yeah. And you to understand mindfulness properly, you have to understand the culture of practice. And the essence of that culture is remembrance. And like I said in the class this morning, the all suffering in deeper Buddhism and in deep yoga, all suffering comes out of avidya. In Tibet, they call it arigpa. So if you're any Tibetan practitioner, it's arigpa or avidya, same thing. So avidya and arigpa mean forgetfulness. Literally, it's ignorance, it's ignoring, it's forgetting. Yeah. So rigpa or vidya is knowing, it's remembering. And it's remembering what we are, remembering what the essence, if you like. Essence isn't a good word to use because it suggests there's something little and tiny in there that's special or rather than all the rest of it, okay? Yeah. So it's not the best word to use, but we've got this poverty of words. But, you know, that sense of original goodness, that sense of beauty, that sense of continuous, heartfelt, compassionate presence. That's sati, that's mindfulness, and that's what remembrance is about. And recognizing that in everyone.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's the important piece. And for me personally, this is interesting because it draws it right back to my experience this morning. I said to you in the class, I'm relatively flexible in mind, but inflexible in body. But actually, in that present moment, I was thinking, well, actually, the truth seeker in me and the integrity in me said, no, actually, Daniel, you're not always that flexible in your mind either. And I'm open-minded, but actually the tension I feel in my body that prevents me from moving in the way. I mean, even now, I've become conscious of what I learned this morning and how I'm sitting and how I'm breathing. And I'm feeling into the tension in my body, and it's recognizing that actually, and feeling into that tension that's in my body that has, I know for certain, some level of certainty has come from perhaps past trauma. I mean, the last couple of years has been frustrating. I felt anger, all kinds of emotions that wouldn't correlate with bliss, peace, joy, even though those were always available to me, and I did find them at plenty of times, and I know they're always there for me. But on an individual level, I'm feeling that tension, and there is work for me to do to release that tension. But it's not. I'm beginning to see it's not just a physical, I just need to learn how to stretch better, and all of a sudden I'm going to release. But then I look out into the world because I'm hearing into what you're saying and thinking, goodness me, how far we are from that remembrance. But every one of us, or many of us, are carrying that tension. So what is people talk about a global awakening, what is the step that we can take to start to liberate people from that trauma that's held in the body?
Okay, first of all, we can't liberate anyone from it.
Right, of course.
They have to liberate themselves.
Of course.
But with help.
Yes.
We're in it together. There's a phrase from China, from the Chinese Buddhism, which says that if one being is bound, all beings are bound. One being is traumatized, all beings are traumatized. It's about we're in it together. It's basically recognizing we're in it together. So if somebody's traumatized and they're acting out their trauma, it's going to affect everybody. It's a relational experience.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's how we work that relational edge as well, which is a semi-permanent membrane. It's not a picket fence. It's not a wall across Texas. We're talking about we're talking about a very permeable experience.
Yes.
An osmotic experience, and so we are in it together. And the more that each of us can find that way of liberating ourselves from current and past trauma and ongoing situations like that, the better. Yeah. I think, if you look at us bipeds, we stand and walk around 2 feet, and we've got our vulnerable ventral surface facing the world. There's no sensible mammal that would do that. You get your belly down on the ground, And, you know, so having this soft bit where there's no bones and there's no protection in there facing the world, it requires different experiences. And of course, you know, we have these opposable fingers and thumbs, which are unique as well, or many other features. But these are incredible. And, you know, all the tools, we've got some sound recording kit here and stuff, all this amazing stuff that we humans have created. You know, why are we about to blow it all up? How ridiculous. Anyway, there we go. You know, the opposable fingers and thumbs. And of course, what comes with this tool making and what comes with ventral surface to the wall is the need to actually communicate more. You know, we have to be able to speak, communicate, express, and listen and respond. And this kind of, you know, social synapse of communication. And we're still in a process of evolving the social synapse of communication. So I think of communication as an evolutionary art. It's an art form. So we've got things like non-violent communication these days, which is a term I am not a fan of. It should be called compassionate communication. Put it in the positive.
Yes.
You know, but in terms of understanding, you know, separating out emotions and needs and things like this, and looking at how can I more clearly express what's happening inside of here to make that accessible to somebody else so they can help and understand, and I can understand how they're doing that on the inside so we can more effectively work together, be together, grow together, and everything else that we have to do because we're in it together.
Yes.
You know, so those edges I think are powerful and profound. And you know, and this is a necessity from our living experience. This is what we do. This is what we have to do more of. It's part of our growth. Community as well, by the way.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, I feel that. So here's an interesting thing I'd like to unpack. So this idea of we're in it together in community, I resonate with, but also we've seen in the last couple of years through government policies, etc., kind of an erosion of human agency. And I try and think about, in the context of the conversation we've had around duality, non-duality, the relationship between the individual and the collective, and how it's all connected. And it feels like we either go through this idea of really prioritizing the individual, and then there's a downward shift in the kind of collective, or we over prioritize the collective and then the individual loses their sovereignty. Is there a way of harmonizing?
I think so, yeah.
Because that tool making, that creative expression, that uniqueness that makes, you know, we are all of the same fabric of life, but we are intrinsically unique.
Yes.
Balancing that with the idea that we are all in this together and that we are collectively finding our way to a better tomorrow. How do we get greater harmony between those two concepts? I
mean, I want to put a shout out first of all for Robert Sapolsky. If you haven't come across Robert Sapolsky, that's Sapolsky. Look him up. He's written a relatively inaccessible book called Behave. It's 720 odd pages of intense biology and sociology and everything else, but it's brilliant.
Yes.
And it's over there.
I knew I'd seen it as awareness.
Yeah. And David Berraby has written some good stuff as well called Us and Them and the Science of Identity. Really interesting stuff because, again, it's looking at how the brain actually works. So collectively, we have to start to understand. We have to have enough knowledge of how things work. Yeah. If you're just going to drive a car, it doesn't matter. You don't need to know how it works. You don't need to know the mechanics. But if you're going to take that car apart and put it back together and make it work better, you need to understand mechanics. Yeah. And we're at this level, we need to understand the mechanics of how this thing actually works, in my view. Right. Then we can do something useful with it. Yes. And how do we make it better? What tools have we got to optimize it, you know?
Yes.
Yeah, to make it work on really, really well. I think I lost track of your question there a little bit.
I suppose, the harmonizing of the individual and the...
What we've got a predominance of human rights. Yeah. What I don't hear talked about is human responsibilities. Yeah. And I think rights and responsibilities are the balancing thing, right? But to be responsible, first of all, we have to be responsible for this.
Yes.
Which means as an adult who hasn't been damaged by ludicrous amounts of cortisol in childhood. And I say this because if you have been, then your prefrontal cortex won't have switched on properly because it's not joined up properly.
Yes.
So it's difficult to be responsible if your brain has, if somebody's been hit on the head with a hammer, you'd think, oh, well, then maybe they're not responsible for their actions, right? But somebody's been hit on the head by the demographic situation or the sociological situation they grew up in. That's complicated.
Yes.
We have to sort out childhood first in this planet.
Yes.
You know, I've seen people saying this has to be done.
Yes.
Right? And we're not doing it. We're spending ludicrous amounts of money on weapons and all sorts of nonsense instead. Right. Anyway, that if somebody's got that enough of activity, enough activation of the prefrontal cortex, they can start taking responsibility, and they have to start taking responsibility for their well-being, yeah, and their emotions, and their thinking. That's a personal responsibility, in my view, but only when you know it is.
Yes.
So you can't blame other people for it. You can't shout to somebody, "You're not taking responsibility." If they don't know from the inside that they can, they can't.
Right.
All right. So we have to promote the vision, the knowledge that actually there is that responsibility, and that responsibility comes out of awareness. It doesn't come from anywhere else. Yeah, we're patterns, we're biological algorithms, we're patterns playing itself out. And unless there's that awareness in there, it's in awareness that there's choice, and in choice is responsibility. Yeah. But we have to start getting that thing to go. It's not just about human rights. Yes, human rights are crucial.
Yes.
And so human responsibilities, and then we start get balancing act. Okay.
Yes.
So human rights first, I would say. Now let's get the human responsibilities up and start balancing that. We are in it together. How do we do it together? We've got to be responsible together, which means we're caring for each other and everyone in the community and everyone in the world. Ultimately, all living things. We're in it together.
Yes.
Plants, like I said, you can't slaughter a forest and think it's having no consequence on your family. That's ridiculous. You're depriving your ancestors of oxygen, your descendants, I beg your pardon, of oxygen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Interesting. I like that distinction of rights and responsibilities. I suppose in a political context in the world that we live in right now, there's a sense that there is this overarching control of responsibility versus this idea of consciously exploring responsibility together. And I wonder if that is, and I'd be curious to know with your study of across a breadth of practices, it feels like the age of enlightenment where kind of reason and religion went separate ways, science and spirituality went on separate paths. It kind of felt like the divorce of mother and father to some degree, but it feels like we're almost entering, I mean, we were discussing over lunch actually with some of the classmates about how the term age of enlightenment might not have been the right word to use, but there's this almost discussion now of a neo-enlightenment where it's actually the re-emergence of and the consolidation once again of science and spirituality. I mean, you've spoken today using quantum physics, biology, ancient practice, and the integral nature of those two things, rationality and religion. Is there a link there, do you think, between our diminished sense of responsibility and perhaps a fall in the kind of connection to religion, spirituality within the modern world?
A really good question. So first of all, I'm going to deconstruct the word religion.
Please.
Yeah. So religion comes from Latin. It comes from religare, which means to retie. Right. So authentic religion is a reconnection or a remembrance. Authentic religion is remembering what's true and what's real in terms of the livingness, the vulnerability, the softness, the awareness. Okay, so what we talked about.
Yes.
All right. So I think there's lots of things that are out there in the world as religions, but they're institutions. They're institutions of power.
Yes.
Yeah, and control and wealth consolidation. You know, look, some of these institutions are massively wealthy. They're very controlling. They're memes that dominate the human mind, that control a whole range of behaviors. And they're very little to do with that level of reconnection and awareness. That's my personal view. Right. Now, having said that, I think that the medieval religions we're talking about, which we're talking about a Eurocentric vision of religion here,
yes,
at the moment, because the Enlightenment was a Eurocentric thing.
Indeed.
Was, and you know, it's funded by Ghanaian gold, by the way. All right.
Yeah.
It grew out of the gold from Africa. Just saying. All right. So. The name Enlightenment is a name that European people gave to a particular phase in history to describe their own particular process and journey.
Yes.
Which is a bit like human beings calling ourselves Homo sapiens, which means the wise hominid. I mean, again, pardon my language, but WTF? I mean, look how we're behaving. I mean, Homo stupidus is more like at the moment. You know, come on, wake up, guys. Yeah. So I think there's
well, it's like putting ego front and center.
Yeah, isn't it? Yeah, Homo ego. Yeah. It's crazy. But I mean, so I think there is, yes, and having said that, religion did hold beauty and power. And you know, so if I look into the esoteric aspects of any of those religions rather than the exoteric dogma-based
Yes.
form of the institution. If I look into the esoteric elements of those, I find beauty. The deep meditative awareness practices of
Yes.
Celtic Christianity or Sufism, which is largely banned in the world these days, of course, and other elements of practice from. And those aspects of practice are then grabbed by the institution and ossified into something, because again, the institutions are largely about power and dominance and control.
Yes.
And accumulation of wealth. So, but there is something in there, and that separation that happened was necessary. I do believe it was necessary. And I've got some interesting books on the shelf around the corner there about looking at, the questions that scientists aren't allowed to ask, because if you do, you'll lose your tenure. Which are questions around.
Or lose your Twitter profile.
Yeah, you lose it. You lose your money. You won't get funded anymore. So, but there's some great stuff. Looking at the science of belief. The Field by Lynn McTaggart, of course, all this kind of stuff. There's some great stuff out there. But again, that gets twisted and distorted then by people who really don't understand science and grab hold of a bit to throw up on Instagram and build themselves as some kind of fake guru and, sell to the followers and all the rest of the sort of, the cherry picking of science that we tend to do.
Yes.
So all these things have to be taken in good measure and in balance, I think, which is why I would love the work of Richie Davidson, because Richie Davidson is a researcher in meditation, but he also tells you the things that we don't know. There's this and there's this, and Sapolsky as well. He's saying, there's this piece here. We know this pretty much. It's pretty uncontrovertible relatively, but we don't know this, and this is questionable. And actually, it all changed then because we got some new information in. And we've got to stay on top of the curve of information as well.
Yes.
So for me, it's that kind of that deep, compassionate presence is necessary, and staying with the curve of increasing levels of science. So we're bringing those two things back together in ourselves.
Yes.
The religare, the reconnection, and the science. So it's not up to external institutions to do that for us. That's up to us to do that, I think.
Indeed, that's powerful. Very powerful. I think I resonate with that deeply.
Yeah.
It's related. I'm just curious to explore, and I know we're coming up to the end of the conversation, but this kind of commercialization of mindfulness, yoga, these different practices, in my view, I see one hand, it's made things more accessible that have utility and benefit. But I also am curious about how far it distorts from ancient traditions and true practice and principle. Is this becoming like a plastic, fantastic, consumerized version of the essence of what is supposed to be there? What's your take on the kind of modern?
Do you want a quick answer?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And it's also okay. I think yes, primarily. I mean, we can look at let's just look at yoga for a minute. We could think about this in terms of mindfulness or anything. There's always going to be, and always have been, edges of dissonance, edges of confusion. There always is, right? And that takes different shapes depending on the culture and how things move in the context within which they're evolving, growing, changing.
Yes.
Of course, so, when yoga was first brought to the West, I think it was by Swami Vivekananda in the time of Queen Victoria. And he went to teach at the Interfaith Conference in Chicago.
Yes.
Yoga hit the West and it was like, wow, what's this stuff? But but if we look at Swami Vivekananda, Swami Vivekananda is great. I mean, a great man. And, he had some interesting stuff running as well. He didn't do any much body-based practice because his teacher, who was a very interesting character, very, very interesting character, he didn't learn physical practice. That wasn't his thing, right? So you get bits of it arriving in the West, and of course, what happened in the '60s, there was a surge with the Beatles and all this kind of thing of yoga in the West.
Yes.
So some people were turned on to that, but it was still very avant-garde, and it wasn't until the 1980s really with Madonna, particularly actually Madonna and Sting and characters like that. When they found Ashtanga Vinyasa Yoga with Sri K. Patabi Joyce in Mysore, that hit the West. And that really kicked off a whole commercial thing of yoga. So all the studios we have these days have grown out of that kind of surge of popularity of yoga.
Yes.
And of course, it's commercialized. The tradition is that you spend 12 years working with a teacher. You find yourself a teacher, and the guru principle is because it's a word that doesn't mean anything anymore. Guru means gravitas. It means weight. It means a movement from unconsciousness to consciousness. That's what guru means. And it's a combination of the essential nature of the universe, right, with the heart space of the seeker, the individual, the one who's seeking and finding, in conjunction with a human being who acts as a teacher, a role of a teacher. You can't have a guru. It's a role. It's something that, and with appropriate methods. Right. So when those things become conjunct in some way, you get a powerful, accelerated learning curve for those individuals involved.
Yes.
All right. So that that principle was considered to be priceless.
Yes.
All right. So you couldn't pay for it. It was invaluable. Why? You can't pay for it. There's nothing. No matter how many gold or diamonds you can't afford it. So don't bother. Right. But what you can do is you can show a symbol of your generosity by giving what you can generously afford to the teacher, because they have to live.
Yes.
They have to eat, they have to live,
Yes.
and so on. Right. So that was called dana.
Yes.
Right. So in the world it grew up in, a world of generosity. Dana means giving generously. And of course, if you even look at that word, it's been translated in English as donation, which means giving as little as you can.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Size of coin.
Yeah.
So it's a fascinating journey from dana, which is generosity.
Yes.
And if you look at these cultures, they're rooted in dana. And if you look at the shamanic culture, it's rooted in reciprocity, munaya. And reciprocity is giving and taking.
Yes.
So if you go into the woods to take a tree down for a lodge pole for your teepee, you have to talk to the tree. Yeah. You have to leave tobacco for the tree.
Yes.
Yeah. You take it down, you leave a gift. You can't just take it. You have to communicate. Are you the right tree? Are you the tree I need to take? I'm taking your life. I appreciate your life. There's a reciprocity. There's an engagement. And of course, these days, we just turn trees into lumber. They're just things that we can just, cut down. It's just a different thing we've done.
Yes.
But that reciprocity, which is, again, the foundation of how most indigenous traditions would have lived, has been lost. We've created something else. It may not be about finding. I'm not an eco-romantic. I don't know. I don't think there's a golden age we should go back to. But I think there's some teaching, some essence of what is in there that we can start to pay attention to in a very, very powerful way. And start to think, okay, this stuff is important. And this relational edge, this relational intelligence of appearance of self and other, and appearance, whether the self and other is tree or whether the self and other is another human being. These are the things we have to pay attention to. This is one of the pillars we were talking about.
Fantastic. Now, to close out, we began with the kind of story of how I attended your breathwork class this morning and my kind of inner journey. Christopher was with us on Wednesday night inside the Elevate Network, delivering an introductory session, which I want to signpost to you. So if you haven't yet joined our Elevate Network, the replay from that session in there, it's a 90-minute session. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please go over to weareelevate.org and you'll find it in the past events. You'll also see in the main feed, you'll see the replay posted there. So you can actually enjoy that practical experience, which will actually give you a sense of the experience that I had myself this morning, but also as a group that we went through this Wednesday. You can go through that in full. Could you tell us just very briefly about some of the benefits of breath work? And that's a big question, because we could talk about the origins, and we haven't in some ways touched upon it, but some of the benefits right now to breath work, if people were to embrace it.
I mean, breath work has been part of many global traditions for thousands of years. And the benefits initially are looking after your central nervous system. So taking yourself from a place of stress, suffering and difficulty into a place of ease, clarity and well-being. So the first step is simply coming from difficulty into a place of relative ease. So shifting from that stress-oriented event into something else and learning how to manage that space so you can do it well.
Yes.
Because challenges don't go away.
Yes.
They're not going to disappear. So it's about how do you manage that. So that's the first thing it gives you. And the second thing it gives you is almost a level of kind of, I would say, relentless energy. If you think about this universe, think about what it takes to kickstart a universe. Can you imagine just how much energy it takes to kickstart a universe, to that initial and it's still expanding, by the way. That is huge. And we are that. We're not separate from that, but we can collapse into this place and I've got no energy. I'm like, oh. You know, but we are that energy too. So if you breath work brings you back in the recognizing it, oh God, I'm that as well.
Yes.
You know, this is also true. All right. So you can get a huge amount of energy. You can get access to the flow state, optimization, I would say, you know. So the flow state is where your resources and your challenges are meeting each other so beautifully in this refined state of continuous flow. Yeah, so you're kind of on the ball, you're on the point, you can stay there, and you learn how to, it's like surfing, you learn how to surf the edge of that experience.
Yes.
And breath work brings you that. So that's another piece. And I think that, you know, the other thing about breath work is it teaches you to be in relationship in a really healthy way. So for example, if you wanted to say something, you tell me, if you wanted to talk to me, I might be paying attention to my breath, and it enables me, rather than just thinking up the answer in my head while you're talking, I can be fully present with what you're saying, feeling, resonating, doing the whole mirror neuron thing and everything else while you're doing that. Yeah. Well, questions around mirror neurons, but anyway, yeah.
Yes.
But do all that thing and then allow the answer to arise from the body, from the heart, from the mind in a spontaneous way without having to pre-formulate it. So that's sort of relational edge as well. So I think it's a whole range of ways of creating a more optimal state for us as human beings.
Yes.
Yeah. That's what it gives you.
Well, that's incredibly powerful. And all I can say from my early experiences, and I've practiced a little bit of the breathing with some of the kind of traditional meditation techniques, but I feel like now this concentrated practice, I mean, already just in these 2 sessions, I mean, off the back of the Wednesday session, I slept like an absolute baby, and I have a baby, so I haven't got the best of sleep record at the moment. And a number of the people's comments inside of the Elevate Network afterwards, I've never slept so well. I mean, we were doing it at night. We did it 8 till 9:30. But just some of the things that people shared just from that one introductory experience was just so profound. And that's why I was so excited to come to the class this morning, have this conversation, because even just getting a glimpse of what's possible, it's just opened my mind again. Interestingly, it goes into the seeker mode, and I kind of want to understand the history of it all. But actually, this conversation has brought me right back to what's in here. But I just really want to make sure that our audience has the opportunity to sample it, you know, curiously with an open mind. So do go check out the replay inside the Elevate Network. It's a 90-minute session. You'll hear a little bit more about the background we've just touched upon. You'll go through some practice. And you'll hear a little bit about other people's experiences in the Q&A at the end, so you can watch that inside the network. Now, we're recording this on a Friday, but it's going out live on Monday. So this, as you're watching this live, it will be the 2nd of May. We're actually beginning a 7-day breathwork challenge with one of Chris's courses, where every day, well, you tell us a little bit about what happens.
Yeah, sure. And we've got one of the courses we've got is what I call a 7-day breath challenge, which is a way of, because the way breathwork works really is by regularity. You've got to be doing it on a regular enough basis.
Yes.
Because you're working with the biology, and that's not going to stop.
Yes.
So those biological drives are going to push you around to a degree, or you're going to work with them.
Yes.
So breathwork is a way of working with that.
Yes.
It's working effectively, like I said, to optimize. So what we're doing on the 7-day breath challenge is introducing one practice a day, except that there are 7 days, there are 9 actually. So it's two on 2 days. But basically you're getting a little practice to do, with the idea that you then do that 3 times in the course of the day. So I teach this thing where you do 3 short 5-minute practices.
Yes.
Because to get it into your life, you know, it's about habit creation.
Yes.
And I was saying to people on the Wednesday, nobody would have not cleaned their teeth this morning.
Yes.
We just do it.
Yes.
And everybody wipes their bum. You don't go put in there and think about, I'm going to go out, I can't be bothered today. I haven't got time. You know, you just do it, right? So it's the same with breath work. When you understand breath work from the inside out, you know that it's a practice of basic psychological, emotional hygiene.
Yes.
Yeah, and well-being. So you wouldn't leave your house without doing it.
Yes.
Right. So it's getting into that framework of mind, and because we didn't learn it when we're young, we have to learn it. It's harder to get those habits in place.
Yes.
So the 7-day thing is a way of, okay, here you go. There's some little practices to do. Start weaving them into your life and see how it feels. And if you get it down for a week, then we can extend that to a month. And once you've got it in for a month,
yes,
you've got the beginning of a real breathwork discipline.
Yes.
Because, you know, it's all well and good to do some great breathwork somewhere for one day, but then it's gone. You've got nothing.
Yes.
So it's about getting it in.
Building the discipline,
Building
yes.
building the edge of habit. Yeah.
Yes. Now you described it as 3-5-3-6-5
That's right,
on
yeah.
Wednesday, and we've
Yeah.
called the challenge 3-5-7
Great stuff.
to get you started. So if you're watching this now and you'd like to join us as part of that 7-day challenge, I'll be taking part myself.
Yeah.
We've created an event inside the Elevate network, so that'll run for the full 7 days, and we're going to go through it together. So everyone who's doing the challenge on the course with us is going to start on Monday. We're going to share our experiences, how it's making us feel, the impacts that we're feeling, the challenges and questions we've got. We're going to do it together as a group for the course of the week. For the curious amongst you, I invite you to go and join the event. Go and take part. You'll find all the joining instructions on there inside weareelevate.org. You just need to go to the events tab, and you'll see the 7-day challenge. For those of you who want a little bit more information about breathwork, go and watch the 90-minute overview. Take part in that overview, and if it feels right at the end of that, then do join us on the challenge. You will also find inside the Elevate network other ways that you can, if you wanted to learn more about Chris's work, we've outlined a few different ways that you can actually continue your breathwork journey. Yeah. But it would be beautiful to have you with us for the 7-day challenge. I'm really, really looking forward to this. I can't wait to build a new habit. I've got that kind of curious, humble student in me activated again, which is my favorite place to be, because it's just that I just know that I'm at the edge of something that can really bring something new into my experience, and I invite you to enjoy that experience yourself. If you're a seasoned breathwork practitioner, come and join us anyway. Share your experience as well. So just go over to weareelevate.org. Again, you'll find the replay in the event section, and you'll also find the 7-day challenge. You'll see it straight there. So join us inside the Elevate network if you wish to take part. If you found this conversation insightful and illuminating, I'm sure you have, please hit the share button. My sense, and as explained to Christopher on the way to being here today, that it feels like the world is yearning for this type of conversation and this type of practice, this type of work, but it doesn't perhaps yet know what it's yearning for. And to me, I feel like I found some clues around some of the next steps, not only on my own journey, but I can also see how by embodying some of these things myself, creating a ripple effect in the world and inviting people through my own experiences of these things to become the kind of change I want to see in the world. And if we all play our role in that, then we start to create a ripple effect. And perhaps we can begin to create a world where the us and them situation starts to break down, and we actually recognize that we are not separate and we are connected. I
mean, like Sapolsky says, and ultimately what we have to do is stop doing us and them and just do us.
Yes. Team humanity, I call it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the we. It's looking, or as one of my friends called it, the moi. It's just not me, it's moi. You've got to start really deconstructing this whole, and it is biology, so we've got to get to grips with that as well. Like I said, talked about the rodent's brain, it's deeply rooted.
Yes.
So it's going to take some effort, it's going to take some work, which is why we do the disciplines, because they actually work.
I'll invite you just to share a parting word of wisdom. So we called this the Elevate podcast. We want to elevate humankind, elevate the human experience, and enrich the world we live in. Is there any words of wisdom that sing into the word elevate? What does elevate mean to you? What do you see as a step into elevating humanity?
I think to work with elevation, you have to have roots. Yeah. If you look at a tree, the bigger the tree grows, the deeper roots need to be. So for me, elevation requires roots. It requires grounded solidity. Yeah, it's not just about floating off in the clouds. It's so that it's about that expansion as well. It's about rooted, expansive growth rather than just So I think for me it's about this. It's about getting really real and true and alive in this, and then we can really do this journey.
Wonderful. Great wisdom. Thank you so much, Christopher Gladwell. Thank you to our audience who've watched us live, and thank you to those watching the replay or listening to the audio version of this track. This is the Elevate podcast with me, Astin-Gregory. We broadcast 2 interviews per week. We hold weekly events inside the Elevate network, which we talked about. So please do join our mailing list at danastingregory.com/podcast. You'll find out more about great conversations like this one, the different practices and events that we have inside the Elevate network. Plus, we haven't spoken about this in the podcast yet, but we are doing a 1-day festival event. We're hosting a 1-day Elevate Day on the 24th of June at the Campfire Convention. Very early days yet, but we're very excited, and we hope to be bringing conversations and practices like we've discussed here today. And we've got lots more physical activations planning up in the works for the summer. So I'm very excited about what's coming ahead. So please join our mailing list to make sure you are fully aware of what's coming. And I look forward to seeing you on our very next episode. This week, we are talking about, it's really a continuation of this conversation. We've got JP de Villiers with us this week talking about inner peace and how we cultivate inner peace and how we can start to contribute to peace in the world by finding peace within. So it's a beautiful continuation of the journey that we've begun today. So again, thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to seeing you on our next conversation.